Wow. Well, thanks everybody for having me. Before I get into my presentation, I'll just echo a couple things that Nada said. I got involved with Neolife probably about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Honestly, I don't really remember. But I've been in direct selling business in some way, shape, or form, nutritional supplements for a long time, probably since before 2010, maybe earlier. And when I got involved with Neolife, I felt the same way. It was the same thing, like I had never heard of it, and which I thought was pretty surprising. But I will say that my involvement on the scientific advisory board with Neolife, as compared to other companies that I've been involved with, most of those companies, they really just want to put your name up there and say, this guy's on our board, and then they don't really do anything with you. But Neolife, actually, they put you to work. So, I've been more involved with product development and the rest of the scientific advisory board, which I'll talk about later. But we are pretty intimately involved with the production of pretty much every product that Neolife makes. And it's the most sort of evidence and science-driven company that I've ever been involved with. With other companies, there's usually marketing drives what products are being made. And with Neolife, it's been a very, very different experience. I'll give you an example. I was involved with a company that, very briefly, I was on their board, and they wanted me to develop a recovery drink that was friendly to the ketogenic diet, okay? Now, if you don't know what that means, a ketogenic diet, you basically, to keep it short, you just don't eat carbohydrate, okay? But a recovery drink, the whole point of a recovery drink is to replace the carbohydrates that you burn during exercise. So to make a ketogenic recovery drink, it doesn't even make any sense. Like you can't make a ketogenic friendly recovery drink if you're not eating carbohydrates in the first place. And I explained this to them. I said, you can't make a recovery drink that doesn't have carbohydrate in it. You couldn't call it a recovery drink. And they're like, well, we want you to do it anyway, because we have a lot of promoters who are in a ketogenic diet. We know we could sell it. And that was pretty much my last day working at that company. So, I knew at that point that they were going to make it no matter what I said, even though it didn't make any sense, even though it wasn't an evidence-based product. It was basically a marketing product that was going to fly regardless of whether the scientific advisory board thought it was a good idea. And with Neolife, it's just the opposite. Marketing might come up with an idea, and if the SAB says this isn't a good idea, that product doesn't fly. That's it. And that's the end of the discussion. So that, I think, is something that is rare in the supplement industry. So, that's just one thing that we do. And, like right now, for example, we're in the process of developing 3 protocols for 3 of our different products to do a clinical trial to make sure that these things are actually work and safe and do what we say they do. So, other companies just don't put their resources into doing those kinds of studies. Those studies are expensive to do. Those companies would rather spend that money on marketing and labeling and flashy packaging and stuff like that. So it's definitely been a unique experience. I think it's a unique company. And I think you'll sort of see that. If you haven't yet, hopefully you'll see that as I talk a little more about these things. So I'm going to talk today about basically some problems that are in the food system and what those problems are causing from a health perspective. I'll talk about some dietary strategies that are popular among people. And then I'll talk about Neolife solutions that sort of go along with those dieting strategies. I think we're going to have to turn the lights out so we can see this here. Well, I don't know, you tell me. I don't know if you can see that very well, but okay. So have you guys heard of ultra processed foods? Right? Yeah, it's beaten to death, right? You hear it all the time. Okay, so foods fall, there's basically a classification system called the NOVA classification system. I don't know why it's called the NOVA. That doesn't stand for anything. The original article that the system was published in was in Portuguese. So NOVA is somewhere in the title, so they call it the NOVA classification system. But the way it works is basically group 1 foods are unprocessed foods. Like you pick an apple off a tree, that's a group 1 food. A group 2 food are processed ingredients, like olive oil, for example. If I take an olive off a tree, it's a type 1 food. If I squeeze the oil out of it, now it's a type 2 food. It's minimally processed. Type 3 foods are things like bread, cheese, things that are a little more processed than that. And then group 4 foods are what we would refer to as the ultra-processed foods. So this says formulations made mostly or entirely from substances derived from foods and additives. So this would be like a donut. Like if you take a donut, it's made out of flour, which is refined. It's made out of oil, which is somewhat processed. It's made out of sugar, which is obviously refined. Colors, it's fried in oil. So there's not really any minimally processed foods in a donut. It's sort of like an engineered food, if you will. Those are the things that we're going to talk about today. So if you look at these things here we have 106 calories worth of Oreos and roughly the same amount of calories in an apple, okay? Now, I want you to imagine you're at home and you're sitting in front of the television and you're watching a movie and you have a bowl of Oreos in front of you and you have a bowl of apples in front of you. And I said, you could eat as many of either one as you want. You're probably going to eat the Oreos, right? I would eat the Oreos. And I'll just speak for myself. Now, how many Oreos potentially could you eat? If I told you they're not bad for you, they're not going to gain weight, you can eat as many as you want, ad lib eat them, even just go crazy. You pretty much eat as many Oreos that are there, right? You eat them until you couldn't eat anymore, okay? But if I said the same thing about apples, could you picture yourself just eating one apple after another, grab another one up? You wouldn't do that, right? Why wouldn't you do that? You know, the apple, there's fiber in the apple, there's water in the apple. The fiber, the water and the fiber in the apple are very filling, right? But for one reason, you get bloated, you get filled up. When you take an ultra-processed food, essentially what you're doing is you're removing all of the things that make that food satisfying, make that food satisfying in terms of filling, right? And they're engineered that. They're engineered so that you can't stop eating, okay? So this is why they're so likely to make you gain weight. It's not that there's something inherently in the food itself that makes you gain fat. It's the fact that there's no satisfaction whatsoever when you eat them, and you could just eat them and eat them and eat them and eat them. And you end up eating more calories, okay? So, you know, these things have the same amount of calories, but obviously if you ate that apple, you'd feel more satiated than if you ate 2 Oreos. I mean, 2 Oreos. Who eats 2 Oreos, right? The only person who eats 2 Oreos is somebody who doesn't have any more than 2 Oreos, right? You buy those little like packages that come with 2 Oreos, that's it. All right. So this is ultra, now I know you can't see these countries here. This is the ultra processed foods in the diet by the country, okay, as a percentage of calories. USA is obviously on the far right, right? So we eat the most junk, and when we say junk food, that's what we're talking about, ultra processed foods. So USA is the most, then the United Kingdom, and then Canada is next, okay? Now, there are some countries that have obesity rates that are very similar to the United States. So for example, Mexico is all the way down here. Mexico has half of the amount of ultra-processed foods in the diet as the United States does, but their obesity rate is almost the same. And that's because Mexico, globally, is the single highest consumer of soda, okay? So it's the sugar. Their sugar consumption from sugary beverages is just through the roof, and that's an ultra-processed food. So they don't have as many ultra-processed foods, but they get an enormous amount of their calories from one single source of ultra-processed food, which is soda, okay? And you'll notice when we go through this, that Canada is about 10% behind the US in terms of obesity rates, ultra-processed food consumption, for various reasons, which we'll talk about.
Sorry, Todd.
Yeah.
Who's the lowest?
The lowest, Romania, Colombia, Hungary, Italy, Estonia, Croatia, Taiwan, South Korea. Those are the lowest. And if you look at obesity rates in those countries, they're generally going to be, the obesity rates generally mirror this graph, okay? Now, this is Canadian consumption of ultra-processed foods by age. So if you look here, and this is again as percent of calories in the diet, 9 to 13-year-olds have 57% of their calories from ultra-processed foods, while older people tend to eat fewer ultra-processed foods. And this is important because children, in terms of obesity rates and metabolic disorders and all the diseases and lifestyle-related problems that go along with obesity, are skyrocketing in children, right? Which means down the line, this is going to be an enormous health burden. This generation, 9 to 13-year-old kids today, is the first generation in modern history that won't live longer than their parents, okay? And that is because of obesity and the problems related to obesity-related diseases. Hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, other metabolic disorders, cardiovascular disease. All those things are a function of lifestyle, which is a function of diet and your activity level, okay? This is ultra-processed food consumption in the US and Canada. So this graph on the left is the percent of ultra-processed foods in the grocery store. So in the United States, we have about almost 70% of the calories in a grocery store from ultra-processed foods. In Canada, it's about, like I said, 10% lower than that. Depends on where you look. Did you ever hear somebody say when you go to the grocery store, you should shop the perimeter?
Yeah.
Right. Because that's where all the non-processed stuff is, right? If you go down the center, down the aisles, everything's ultra-processed because ultra-processed stuff is cheap to make and it's shelf-stable. It's cheap to ship. It doesn't need refrigeration. It all boils down to how cheap is it to manufacture? How much money can you make out of it per calorie? So that's really what drives the food supply in the United States, and to a greater extent here as well, okay? Or I shouldn't say to a greater extent, to a lesser extent, but you're catching up. Everybody eventually catches up to the US. We just ruin it first, right? So I think it leaks over. I think that's what happened. It's insidious and kind of migrates over the border. Okay, so let's talk about ultra-processed food in grocery stores. When you go to a grocery store, when it comes to decision making, people will buy most of what is available to them, right? That's just human nature. That's human behavior. Whatever there's the most of, that's what I'm going to buy, right? Manufacturers know this. And there's an inverse relationship between the degree of processing and the food cost. So the more processed the food is, the cheaper it is to manufacture and the cheaper it is to buy. Okay, and you would that seems counterintuitive. Like, why is an Oreo, why is that cheaper than an apple that just grows on a tree? Right? Well, it's because of shipping costs and refrigeration costs and things like that, right? So, you know, if you go into a grocery store and buy bottled water or soda, they either cost the same or the water costs more. Right? Well, why is that? Clearly, it's more difficult to make soda. Well, it's because there's less demand for the water. So the infrastructure is already there for shipping soda, for production of soda. It's extremely cheap. There are massive corn subsidies for high fructose corn syrup production. It's just cheaper to make, okay? And there's a tremendous amount of research, marketing research that's done to make sure that you're going to buy as much ultra-processed food as possible, okay? So some of those things that food manufacturers do, flavor engineering. So they basically manipulate every aspect of that food so that it becomes hyper palatable. You can't stop eating it. You know, the Oreo, when you take a bite of an Oreo, the force required to break the Oreo is designed. A chip, when you bite into a chip or a Dorito or something like that, then the torque required to break that thing is engineered to be a certain point. The noise that the bag makes when you open the bag is designed so that you will eat more of them. If a bag is too loud or makes too much noise, people won't eat as many of them. It's true. It's absolutely true. At one point a few years ago, I can't remember who it was, a bunch of chip manufacturers made a biodegradable bag, right? You could throw the bag somewhere and the bag would degrade over time, but the bag was too noisy. The bag was annoying when you opened the bag. When you held the bag, it made so much noise, it was annoying. People stopped, they don't make it anymore, right? Because of that reason, okay? Manufacturers try and find something called the bliss point. And the bliss point, this is a manufacturing term, it's just the optimal combination of ingredients, textures, flavors, where they just sort of hit that magic spot where you can't stop eating, right? Everything is engineered that way. They do brain scans, functional MRI, and electroencephalogram. They will put people in an MRI and feed them chips and see how the brain lights up depending on what they're eating. Okay? Right? So the system is rigged against you. So don't feel guilty like when you're eating Oreos and you can't stop eating them. It's designed for you to not be able to stop eating them. It's not because you don't have the willpower to stop. It's because they're designed to outfake your brain. When you go in, they do research where they'll do eye tracking studies, or they'll have a mocked up grocery store with cameras on the shelf that you can't see, and they'll follow where your eyes are going to which labels on the shelf to see which ones you spend the most time on, which ones you look at the most. Okay? It's all calculated. So if you look at these logos, what do all of these logos have in common? They're yellow and red, right? They all have these, somewhere in them there's yellow and red. Yellow and red makes you hungry for whatever reason. I don't know why, but yellow and red, it grabs your attention, it gets you excited, and it makes you want to eat, right? And you'll notice, now that I've pointed it out, when you're driving down the street, look at how many restaurants you see that have yellow and red. Right? Now, there are places that you get around it, like Panera has a green sign. They're trying, because people associate green with like health. That's why all our stuff's green. Right? People associate green with health, right? And no, I'm not saying Panera's health, don't get me wrong, okay? Because you can get some horrible food choices in a Panera. But that's what they're going for. They don't want to look like a fast food place, right? But these places know that these red and yellow colors will trigger that hunger sensation and make you stop and eat. Right? Everything is calculated. Now, when it comes to ultra-processed foods and obesity, if anybody has any questions about anything, by the way, just yell them out. That's sort of. So this study looked at ultra-processed food consumption and your obesity risk. And essentially what it says is that for every 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption, you increase your risk of obesity by 7%. Okay? Now keep this in mind, the typical Canadian diet is 50 to 60% ultra-processed foods. Okay? Typical American diet is closer to 60 to 70%, somewhere in there. All right, so there's a clear connection between ultra-processed food consumption and your risk of being obese. Now these are, I don't know if you can see this too well, but these are obesity rates among Canadian adults, 2005 through 2018. So this is 2005 up here. The yellow is 25 to 30%. The orange is 30 to 35%, and the red is greater than 35%. So you can see that and the maps of the United States look exactly the same. you can see that there is a dramatic increase in the rates of obesity over 30%, which would be the red. And this is only through 2018. I'm sure if you looked at this now, it would probably be worse. So again, this is a significant problem. And in fact, in the United States and in Canada, obesity and complications related to obesity, things like hypertension, heart disease, it is the #1 medical expense globally, okay, in industrialized countries. And it's only getting worse. Okay, so this graph, and this is in the US, but I'm sure it would look the same in Canada. On the red, on the left side here, you have the availability of ultra-processed foods between 1970 and 2020. And on the right y-axis, you have obesity rate. So, you can see that the obesity rate essentially directly mirrors the availability of ultra-processed foods. Okay? And that would happen anywhere. If you make the more of what you make available to people, that's what they're going to eat. Now, it's not just diet that's causing obesity. You also have to look at the other side of the coin, which is physical activity. So this graph essentially looks at calories. The red line is the calories consumed per day. The x-axis, again, is 1970 to 2020. And the blue axis on the right is calories burned per day. So, you can see that in 1970, the caloric intake was a little over 2,000 calories a day, but the caloric burn was a little over 2,400 calories a day. Okay? But if you look at that now, you can see that the intake is about 2,400 and the burn's about 2,200. So, in 1970, according to this math, which is probably a little extreme, your average daily deficit was about 375 calories. Deficit, meaning you were eating about 375 calories less than you burned. That's a little high. It probably wasn't that much. I mean, that's a pretty big deficit to have every day, but there definitely was not a surplus. Now, there's a surplus of roughly about 200 calories a day. Okay, so there's clearly a difference in activity, right? And we've essentially engineered physical activity out of society, right? I mean, if you think, like, the other day I was sitting at home and I was thinking about this presentation. I'm sitting on the sofa watching Netflix, and I'm thinking to myself, do you remember when Netflix used to send those DVDs in the mail? Netflix wasn't, I don't know, I'm in Canada, so I don't know. Was Netflix always a streaming service? Okay, so back in the day, Netflix wasn't a streaming service. They would literally mail you DVDs, and then you'd watch them, then you'd send them back. Okay? Now, that's not a very active, going to the mailbox and getting your DVD. Prior to that, we had Blockbuster Video, right? You remember that? Did you have Blockbuster Video? Be kind, rewind, right? You had to go and walk around the Blockbuster. You had to pick your video. You had to go home and watch it. And then if you didn't return it in like 2 days, they kept your library card or something like that. Yeah, you had to take the thing back, right? So here I'm sitting there, with my remote, which when I was a kid, we didn't have a remote. You got up and you walked over and you turned the channel. All 13 of them, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm streaming Netflix. I can watch whatever I want. Now, the choices are endless. It was like this in Canada. When I was a kid, at midnight, the TV would literally shut off. Yes. Like they would play the national anthem, and then it would just go static until like 9 o'clock the next morning, right? You didn't have any other choice but to go to bed. There was nothing else to do. But now, you're just sitting there, just brain dead, sucking it all in, right? Shooting that trash in your head, right? Just scrolling. I mean, I've sat there for 30 minutes just scanning channels, not even watching it, just looking for something to watch. Hold on, I'm getting to that. So I said, did I eat Oreos? So you're sitting there watching it, scanning through my endless amount of channels, and I'm looking around my house. I'm like, okay, I just tell my lights to turn on and off. Hey, Google, turn off the living room lights. They go off. Before, I would have had to get up and burn some energy to go do that. I have a robot vacuum cleaner that just goes around the house, right? And if I want to eat, what do? DoorDash, Uber Eats, right? You just call it up. We've essentially removed any type of activity from society, right? And it's slow and it's insidious, right? Like today when I travel, I don't bring my electric toothbrush with me, and I'm going like this. I'm like, what a pain in the ass. It's like I did this for how many years? Like 40 years of my life, I'm doing this with no problem at all. But now all of a sudden, it's like the backup camera. Like, how fast is it to get totally reliant on the backup camera in your vehicle? But you don't know how you lived for so long without it. Right now, like, oh, I got to turn my head. What is this? Right? So we have these dual problems where we're just overfeeding ourselves while our activity is just plummeting. Okay. Okay. Food delivery. So this is food delivery statistics in Canada. $19 billion in 2024, projected to reach 28 billion by 2030. That's another 10 billion in what, 6 years? Something like that. Now that's an enormous increase. You have 50% in 2024, half the country who are basically using some type of, okay. So, and there's some other things here, it shows what they're using, Uber Eats, DoorDash. And then once COVID hit, that really, COVID made everybody super lazy and nobody wants to go back, right? Like in the United States, we're finally bringing back, like, you have to actually go to work. You can't work from home anymore. And people are quitting left and right, like, no, that's all right. I'm not going to go home. It's cruel to make me go back to work. It was like 5 years ago, you were going to work every day, no problem. And now all of a sudden, right? So, here's a graph showing the relationship between food delivery and obesity rates again. So between 2010 and 2024. So, and this is billion. So in 2010, you have what, I don't know what that is, $5 billion. Now it's $100 billion, right? So, and you can see that the obesity rate goes right. Over 70% of food delivery is fast food restaurants. Over 70%, right? And fast food restaurants, the meals are extremely high calorie. 12 to 1,500 calories per meal, compared to what you might make at home that might be 700 to 800 calories per meal. Okay, so this is an enormous caloric jump. And then, if you've ever DoorDash, you'll order something, and then it says, well, do you want a double dash? You can have your driver stop. If you were getting in your car and driving to McDonald's, not going to say when you're done eating at McDonald's, oh, let's stop at 7-Eleven and get a gallon of ice cream and some fried fruit pies, right? But when you see it on your app, you're like, why not? I'll add it, right? And people are more likely to do that. So anyway, okay. I don't want to graph you to death, but this graph shows obesity rates, ultra-processed food consumption, and obesity-related medication spending. This is in the US. So the green line is the amount of money that's spent on obesity-related medications. So these would be things that treat Ozempic. Okay, so Ozempic is an obesity drug. Well, Wegovy is, but Ozempic and Wegovy are the same drug. They're just different dosages. They're both semaglutide. So these would be things like GLP-1 receptor agonists, like those, and then blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, diabetes medication, all the things. Now, this is different in the US than it is in Canada, because the pharmaceutical industry has much more influence politically in the United States than they do here. Okay. And we'll talk about that, but like, you don't have drug ads on TV in Canada. No, but if you watch CNN, every ad is a drug ad, right? Because it's coming from the United States. So, like, and in the US, they're playing these ads for these diseases that I never even heard of. And I'm like, who is this targeted to? Like, who are the ads for? And I've never heard of this stuff. And apparently there are enough people that have it. And essentially what happens in the United States is if you see an ad and you go into the doctor and say, hey, I saw this ad, will you give me this drug? The doctor will give it to you. That's pretty much how it works. We'll talk a little more about that later. But anyway, it's a huge issue. Now, this is a picture of pretty much of modern medicine. Right? And when you graduate from medical school, at least in the US, doctors take what's called the Hippocratic Oath. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah.
Right, the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. So Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. So he knew as early as 400 BC or something like that, he knew the link between diet and health. And he also said walking is man's best medicine. So he clearly knew that there was a link between diet, exercise, and your health, right? So you would think if doctors are taking the Hippocratic Oath, you would think they would know something about that connection, right? So let's talk about that. We'll talk about the Canadian and the United States medical education. Now, the accreditors of medical schools.
Walk in the forest.
So there's sort of like a reciprocity between the two. So the medical education system in Canada is very similar to the medical education system in the United States. So I know you probably can't read this, it's pretty small. Canadian medical students receive on average less than 25 hours of nutrition education throughout their entire medical education, okay? Less than 25 hours. And the majority of them in the United States receive none at all, okay? In some cases, this training is limited to 5 to 10 hours, often integrated into broader courses like biochemistry or general wellness. Okay, so there's dedicated classes towards nutrition. They also don't have any on exercise either. I'll just let you know that right now. So Canadian medical curricula often lack comprehensive training of exercise prescription and counseling. A national survey that 82% of family physicians reported inadequate formal nutrition training during their education. So the doctors are aware of this, but
Reading that so good.
US and Canada is not prevention. Now, it's more Canada, it should be, right? Because you have a single payer system for the most part, and private insurance is not something that is as prevalent as it is in the United States. You don't have that sort of confounding factor in there. There's a greater interest. It would make more sense for Canada to be more interested in prevention because ultimately it saves tax and a healthy society. In the US, we don't care about that, right? We can't, because the US is all about disease management, right? It's not about disease prevention, right? Because if I go back to this slide, if I manufacture Ozempic, do I have an interest in having people not eating fast food? No. If I manufacture Ozempic or an obesity drug, I want people to eat as crappily as possible because I want the diseases that go along with that. And interestingly enough, there are lobbying firms in DC, for example, that those lobbyists represent the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry at the same time. Now, you think, well, why would that happen? Because what's in the best interest of the food industry in terms of manufacturing processed foods as much as possible because it's cheapest and makes them the most money, that also causes the most disease. So the pharmaceutical industry wants the food industry to be able to do whatever it wants to do in terms of providing these unhealthy options, because that creates disease burden, which then creates a way for them to generate more income. Okay, so the system is really built to disincentivize any type of healthy living or healthy options. Okay, and it's to a lesser extent here, but it's still basically that's still the way it runs here as well. Okay, the medical education model emphasizes diagnosis and pharmacological treatment. We generally don't go to the doctor when we're healthy, right? Like you're not going to make an appointment to the doctor for the doctor and then go into the doctor like, what are you doing here? Nothing. I'm just, check me out, just make sure I'm doing okay. You might go for a physical every once in a while, but by and large, you're not going to your doctor to ask them for preventative advice about how to keep yourself healthy. You go when there's something wrong with you. And what do? They prescribe something, right? That's the medical model. It's like taking your car to a mechanic. Oh, I'm hearing this noise. Okay, well, it needs X, Y, Z. Same thing. I'm feeling this pain here. Okay, well, you need to take this. Okay, that's how it works.
You were not muted.
People treating obesity with this is again in Canada. These are GLP-1 receptor agonists. These are the number of people being treated with these drugs. So this is the little blue bar is 2019, the dark blue bar is 2023, and you can see you had 30,000 people taking these in 2019. Now you have 205,000.
Wait, I lost it.
That's not a lot of people. 200.
But I lost my screen.
Look at the difference between the two, right? In what is it, 4 years or something like that?
Your face is on.
You have this massive increase in these products. Now, the main reason why it's not higher is just because they're so expensive and you don't cover them. And the US insurance doesn't cover them either. But there's a lot of pressure happening on the government to provide more of these obesity-related medications like Ozempic to the populace. Now, this is frightening in the sense that Wegovy, Ozempic, Mounjaro, all the GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs to fight obesity are approved. In what age do you think? How old do I have to be for the doctor to be able to prescribe one of those drugs? Anybody have any guesses? 12. So they're approved for kids over 12 years old, right? I don't like to laugh, but it's shocking that and so again, think about it. The food industry, what the food industry tries to do is at a very young age try and create brand loyalty among children. This is why one of the reasons why ultra-processed food consumption is higher in kids than it is in adults. But because the kid sees something in the store and they pressure their parents, oh, buy that for me, I want to do blah, blah, blah. So, if I can get a kid to be a fan of McDonald's very early on in life, then they're going to be a lifelong fan of McDonald's. Right? And again, if I manufacture semaglutide or some other GLP-1 receptor agonist, I want the food industry to do their thing because they are building my base. They are building my customer base for me. And I don't need to do anything. If I'm a drug company, all I got to do is create the drug, sit back and let the food industry do my job for me. They're just providing my feeder system of people, right? And this is one of the reasons, the reason these things are available to kids 12 years old, because 30% of kids under 18 are obese, right? That's why they're not going to live as long as our generation, okay? So this is a problem that you have to sort of address young. And I know there are a lot of people that I talk to in Neolife who say, oh, my kids grew up in Neolife. And the doctors notice a difference in those kids. They absolutely notice a difference in those kids. If you're a mother who is using Neolife products, or actually, if you have a good diet and you're using supplementation on a regular basis and you know it and you trust the company that you're taking, you're going to have more healthy kids. Right. So, think about those things as we move through this. So again, MDs are trained to treat sick people. They're not trained to prevent disease. And the most common conditions, again, that they treat are obesity and its associated complications. They're treated most commonly with medications, and the most commonly prescribed medications are ones that treat lifestyle-related diseases. Things like hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders. All of these drugs are things that essentially come about as a result of lifestyle problems. get this one, 23% of Canadians aged 45 to 64 and 39% of those aged 65 to 79 take 5 or more medications concurrently, right? 5 or more, 65 to 79, right? And it's higher in the United States. But, you know, and again, most of those things are things like cholesterol meds, blood pressure meds. A lot of the meds that people take are medications to treat the side effects of other medications that they take, right? And the drug industry loves this. When the opioid epidemic was running rampant in the United States, opioids give you constipation. So they would TV of this guy on a construction site, for example, and he's like grabbing his gut because he can't crap, and he fell at work and hurt his back on the construction site, so now he's opioids, and now he has constipation. So they come out with a drug for OIC, opioid-induced constipation, right? I'm telling you, I think they invent diseases. They're like, if you get up you get up twice in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, well, yeah, okay, then you need some prostate drug or something like that, right? Well, getting up twice to go to the bathroom is not in itself enough of a reason, doesn't indicate that you need a prostate drug, right? But I think they sort of place it in your head. If you say these symptoms enough, but my mom was great about this. If there was a drug, if there was some condition, she had it. If she would see an ad on TV for some new medical condition, like restless leg syndrome, she'd go, "Oh, I have that. I think I wake up sometime and my legs are restless. I'm going to go get this medication." And I think that's how we're conditioned in the United States anyway. Is you see something, you're like, "Oh, well, maybe I'd be better if I just took this drug," and that's probably why they put these ads on TV, because they know people are going to talk to their doctor about that. And people pressure their doctor. Okay. Now, in the United States, the pharmaceutical industry heavily influences medical education. So they provide research grants to universities. And those universities then use that money to help run the administration of the university. And again, there's a lot more regulation about this in Canada. So like in the United States, it's not uncommon for a drug rep to show up at a doctor's office and bring lunch and gifts for everybody, and they lay out this spread and fly them on vacations to Jamaica and give a 20-minute talk about something and bring their families and stuff like that. That kind of stuff runs rampant in the United States. And the idea then is, well, if somebody comes into me with diabetes and I'm going to give them a drug, am I going to give them the drug of the guy who doesn't bring me lunch? Or am I going to give them the drug from the guy who does bring me lunch? I would give the guy who brings me lunch. Without question. I am very easily bought that way. If I have two options and they're not significantly different from each other, and this guy is going to fly me to Jamaica if I give a 20-minute talk, and this guy's not, hands down, and I'm not breaking any laws, why would I not do that? Right? Well, the drug companies know that. Why wouldn't you do that? You would. So that's what they do. Okay? So that's common practice. Continuing medical education. Doctors need continuing medical education. They can't, after medical school, if they want to keep their license, they have to keep going, getting these medical education. Well, who do you think runs those things? Drug companies will run those classes. So if I'm doing a class on diabetes management, and I produce a diabetes drug, and now I'm talking to the doctors, if somebody presents with XYZ and you're going to give them a drug, I'm not going to recommend somebody else's drug. I recommend my drug, right? And then they're more likely, then I buy everybody lunch. And then they're more likely to prescribe my drug. That's how it works. It's like legal bribery, basically. Scholarships and fellowships. Drug companies will give scholarships and fellowships to medical schools, gifts, promotional items. It's rampant in the medical industry in the United States. These are the top 5 prescription medications in the US. I couldn't find this data for Canada, but it's probably the same. The first one is a statin for cholesterol, Lipitor. The second one's metformin, which is a diabetes drug. The third one is levothyroxine, which is a thyroid drug, which goes along with metabolic disorder and those kinds of things. And the last 2, lisinopril and amlodipine, these are blood pressure medications. Okay, so these are the top 5. So 4 of the 5 top most prescribed drugs are for blood pressure and diabetes. And in the overwhelming majority of people, both of these things can be avoided or reversed with diet and exercise. Now, again, keep thinking about that. If my 5 top conditions, my 5 top money-making drugs are related to obesity, is there any incentive for me to get rid of that? No, absolutely not. I mean, it would be bad business to get rid of it, right? We call it the healthcare system, but it's not really a healthcare system. It's really a sick care system. It's a disease management system, right? You want people to stay diseased and keep them alive for as long as you possibly can, so that you can keep them on medications for as long as you possibly can. If you think about it solely from a business perspective, right? Like if I was the CEO of a drug company, I would not be a good CEO of a drug company. Because I tend to have a business brain. And I would say, people keep eating this crap as much as possible, right? Because I would know that's where my money maker is, right? So, you know, if your job is your bottom line and you have corporate shareholders and you come up with a drug that treats obesity, you're really, if you try and get rid of obesity, you're really doing a disservice to your shareholders. It's baked in. That disincentive to be healthy is sort of baked into the industry. The global market for obesity drugs could reach $77 billion by 2030, up from $2.4 billion in 2022. Okay, so you can see that's an enormous, enormous chunk of money that the drug companies are not going to want to give up. Okay, so there's no incentive for that. And so this is why they fight, right? Like when RFK gets in there as the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary and wants to clean up the diets of Americans, the first thing they do is try and make him look crazy. You don't want to listen to that idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Because it's a threat to them. It's a threat to that model. Okay. So a sick society is a profitable society. A healthy society is not profitable. Okay, it just isn't. Now I pulled this one because this was researchers at the University of Toronto. Okay? Doctors suggest teenage boys who use muscle building supplements should be sent to a psychologist to check whether they have an eating disorder. So basically what they said was, if a kid is used, and they looked at protein powder. This is what they called muscle building supplements. So if a kid's using protein powder, these researchers says the doctor should refer these people for a full psychological workup because they're afraid they might have an eating disorder. All right? 52% of Canadian boys meet the suggested physical activity guidelines. About 71% of those are in organized sport. So if you're not in organized sport, you're probably not meeting the physical activity guidelines, right? Again, we have a 30% obesity problem in kids. And these people are worried about the ones who are taking protein powder, right? I mean, to me, if a kid is showing any interest at all in their health, as opposed to sitting around playing video games and ordering DoorDash, which is what the norm is, right? If a kid is showing any interest at all in pursuing something where they're going to increase their muscle and they care at all about their diet, I'm not going to try and discourage that by saying there might be something wrong with you. I think you have an eating disorder. Right? What drives that? What drives people to think that that's a problem? Now, I'm not saying that this doesn't exist. Certainly, there's a subset of kids who feel like to themselves, I should have more muscle, I don't look big enough. You know, there are legit eating disorders like that. But that is a small number of people compared to the problem that we have related to childhood obesity, okay? So this study suggests muscle building supplements should be screened, kids who use these should be screened for eating disorders, but how can physicians be the ones that make that call? They don't know, they don't learn anything about diet, they don't learn anything about exercise, and they certainly don't learn anything about supplements. It's not built into their model. And yet we're saying that they should refer them for a full psychological workup. Okay, and why focus on protein powder when you have this huge epidemic of sedentary activity, sedentary kids with poor diet, right? It just seems like it's a misplaced effort. Now, when you have somebody with disordered eating, who do you typically send them to work on their diet? You send them to a registered dietitian, right? Now, there's lots of studies that look at eating disorders in registered dietitians, okay? Orthorexia nervosa, does anybody know what orthorexia nervosa is? That's when you're obsessed with eating too healthy, right? It's like when you, like if you're gonna have a panic attack if you eat an Oreo. That's orthorexia nervosa, okay? This is characterized by compulsive behaviors and increased concerns about healthful eating. Dietitians appear to be especially vulnerable to ON, and it's still debatable whether the disordered eating behaviors motivate individuals to enroll in nutrition programs or whether these behaviors result from an exaggerated preoccupation with healthy eating. So if we look at the research around dietitians, I'm not bashing on dietitians. I've worked with wonderful dietitians. I've also, in my clinic, had clients who were actively working as dietitians who had active eating disorders, okay? So prevalence and correlates of disordered eating behaviors among dietetic students. Study found dietetic students have a higher prevalence of disordered eating behaviors compared to students in other majors. So there's plenty of research to support this. I won't go through all of this, but the question really is, do people who get into dietetics, do they get into dietetics? I know personally dietitians who have gotten into dietetics because it legitimizes their obsession with food, right? They're already, and some people with eating disorders often know more about food than the dietitian does, to be perfectly honest with you. But the question is it being in this program that gives them this obsession with food, or does being obsessed with food drive them into these programs? In any case, my point is, again, going back to the kids who are taking protein powder, you don't want to take some kid who's using protein powder saying, oh, we should see if you have an eating disorder, and then send them to a dietitian who potentially could have an eating disorder, right? I mean, I don't know. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't send them to a dietitian, but it seems to me like you're creating a problem that's not really there, right? You're focusing on the wrong things. So we'll switch gears and we'll ask the question, how do you achieve optimal nutrition without overeating when food has become an increasingly calorie-rich but nutrient-poor and lifestyles are more sedentary than ever? You know, how do we do this? And I think Neolife is one of the ways that we can sort of attack this problem, okay? Now, everybody, when we talk about dietary supplements and health prevention, a lot of people will say, well, you really don't need supplements. You can get everything you need from the diet. And you have to understand where the sort of recommended dietary intakes come from and what they're based on. Like, I'm not sure, I should have looked into this in Canada, how this works, but in the United States, the government publishes recommended dietary intakes. Do they do the same thing here? Yeah. Okay, so in the United States, those things are based on, first of all, essential nutrients, which are things that your body can produce themselves, and the minimum amount of that nutrient that you need to prevent some sort of disease. So if we look at vitamin C, for example, the recommended dietary intake for vitamin C is based on the minimum amount that you need to prevent getting scurvy, for example, okay? Those intakes are not based on the optimum amount that you need to improve health. Okay, they give you just enough to prevent you from getting some disease. So if there was a benefit from taking more than that, they don't really care about that. And you take something like, omega-3 fatty acids that are in omega-3 plus. Those things, there's tons of evidence that omega-3 fatty acids help with cardiovascular disease, overall systemic inflammation. There's cognitive and neural benefits from those things, but there's no recommended dietary intake for those things. Because if you don't eat them, you're not necessarily going to get a disease. So there's all of these compounds that are really good for you in terms of optimizing your health that there's no RDI for. So if your definition of need is based on, can I meet the RDA just through my diet alone, then yeah, you can do that. But can you optimize your health based on just eating through diet alone? Probably not. And if you do, you really need to have a very good understanding of food. And you probably need to eat a lot more than you need calorically in order to get these extra benefits. Like if you just wanted to get a boatload of omega-3s and you decide, well, I'm only going to get it from salmon, you'd have to eat so much salmon to get the equivalent amount that you would if you just took the supplement, that you'd be hypercaloric. You'd be in a caloric surplus. Okay? Okay. So I'm going to talk about fat loss. I'm going to talk about fat loss and some of the typical strategies that people take to lose fat. So, and again, if anybody has any questions about anything, just fire it up. Fat loss is driven by a sustained calorie deficit. You have to eat less than you consume. People will say you have to cut out carbs or you're not going to lose fat. That's not true. You just need to eat less calories over time than you burn and you'll lose fat. Any eating strategy is successful if it creates a deficit. So you could eat paleo, vegan, ketogenic. Any of those things will work as long as you eat fewer calories than you burn. When you lose weight, it is very common for your metabolism to slow. And your metabolism slows usually as a result of muscle loss that accompanies that weight loss. So any dieting strategy that you have, if you want it to be permanently effective, is you have to prevent that muscle loss. One of the single most important determinants of whether or not you will gain weight back after you lose it is how much muscle do you lose during the intervention. So if you don't lose any muscle and you only lose fat, you're much less likely to put that fat back on. If most of your weight loss comes from muscle, you're doomed to put it back on. And the fastest weight loss comes from muscle loss. Okay, so if you're doing something that results in very rapid weight loss, you can be certain, almost certain, that that weight loss is coming from muscle, which means it's going to come back. And in a lot of cases, you gain more fat back than you lost. Okay. Preventing that muscle loss requires higher protein intakes than the RDA. Okay, so if you're in a calorie deficit and you're eating to lose weight, your protein need is higher. If you're exercising in that calorie deficit, your protein need is higher. If you're weight training in that calorie deficit, your protein need is even higher than that. Okay, so you have to make these adjustments. And 5, and this is the most important one, the eating strategy has to be something that you can do for the rest of your life. Has anybody here ever tried the ketogenic diet?
Never.
Okay, so there's a few, right? Was it pleasant? At first. How long did you maintain it? Okay, that's a long time. Yeah. So part of the problem with actually, I'm going to talk about a ketogenic diet here. So we'll talk about a ketogenic diet. So ketogenic diet was originally developed as a prevention to prevent epileptic seizures before there were epilepsy drugs. So for whatever reason, when the brain doesn't have to burn carbohydrate, it stops seizures. So it's a very high fat diet, very low carb diet. It results in rapid weight loss. And it generally does this through a reduced appetite. You're just not hungry. When you don't eat carbohydrate, when you get into ketosis, you're just not hungry. So you eat less. So in some ways it's good. It's good for diabetics in terms of glucose control and things of that nature, but it usually leads to significant muscle loss. And one of the biggest problems with it, it's just hard to maintain. So this is what a ketogenic diet, an example of what a ketogenic diet might look like. Breakfast is 2 whole eggs, 1 yolk, cheddar cheese, half an avocado. A snack would be coconut oil stirred into coffee, keto coffee, or butter in coffee sometimes. Butter might have too much protein, too much carb. Salad with salmon and olive oil. For snack, macadamia nuts with cream cheese. Dinner's 3 ounces of fatty lamb cooked in ghee, which is butter with basically with the dairy removed out of it. And a fat bomb, which is coconut oil, cocoa, butter, and stevia. So it's extremely high fat. You have to eat about 75 to 80% of your calories from fat. It's extremely difficult to do. The main problem with it is people just can't stick to it long term. Now, if you are doing these things, some products that might be good for that would be Pro Vitality and Elevate. With keto, when you first start doing it, what did it feel like mentally when you first started doing it?
Yeah, pretty fun.
Yeah, because the brain loves carbohydrate. The brain can't really burn anything but carbohydrate. Can't burn fat. So this is what the ketogenic diet is. The body takes fat and it converts it into a compound called ketones, and then those ketones can go in the brain, and the brain can burn ketones. But the shift from burning carb to burning ketone makes the brain go all wacko. You don't understand what's going on. You feel terrible. They call it the keto flu. But Elevate helps with those things, mental clarity due to the theanine. Choline is in there to support memory, neurotransmitter activity. All this stuff is sort of improves mental clarity if you're on the ketogenic diet. And then Pro Vitality has Treonen. Treonen has grain sterols in it, which are basically extracted from breads and grains and things that you wouldn't be able to eat on a ketogenic diet. Carbohydrates, whole grain stuff. You can't eat that on a ketogenic diet. So Treonen would provide those extracts, the good stuff that's in grain products. Carotenoid complex helps with immune cell function. This helps with nutrient absorption during these high-fat diets. Omega-3 plus helps balance the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. And then you have a essential vitamin mineral complex, because if you're on a ketogenic diet, you are going to be deficient in a lot of micronutrients. There's just no getting around it because it's so restrictive. There's just not a lot of stuff you can eat.
Question?
Yeah.
Have you heard anyone on keto that is very open-minded to Pro Vitality? Or the other way around, someone that's very skeptical said, no, I don't want to do it.
I have met people that are afraid that anything they eat is going to kick them out of ketosis. So they would be leery about, even if it's not based in anything, they generally have a very, very strict way of eating, and they would say, I can't eat that. But to be honest, I haven't met a whole lot of people who do keto successfully. A lot of people think they're doing it, but really what they're just doing is a high-fat diet. Like if you measured their blood, their ketones levels wouldn't be elevated, right? So most people who try keto just can't get into ketosis because either they eat too many carbs or they'll eat too much protein. And if you eat enough protein, your protein will get converted into carbohydrate in the body, and that kicks you out of ketosis.
Yeah.
So that's actually more common than people actually being in ketosis. Okay, intermittent fasting. Has anybody tried intermittent fasting? Okay, so this includes intermittent fasting is sort of a misnomer. That's when you actually won't eat for a day or two and then eat again. Time restricted feeding is usually what people are normally doing. Okay, so this would be something like, I'm going to take 16 hours off and eat for 8. So the way that works is if you're on a 16-8, essentially what that means is for 8 hours of the day, you're going to be able to eat normally, but then you're going to fast for the other 16. Now, 16-8 is like saying, well, from 9 to 5, I'm going to eat normally. Well, all right. Well, that's like getting up and having breakfast, lunch, dinner, 2 snacks in between. That's not really different than just living. So I think what most people do when they do intermittent fasting is they'll give themselves like a 4-hour window or something like that. They'll say, okay, between 12 and 4, I can eat whatever I want. And these things very often will result in weight loss. But the reason that these things result in weight loss it's because you're consuming fewer calories. It's not something that's magical about the fast. If you give yourself 4 hours, if I say I'm only going to eat between 12 and 4, and at 12 o'clock, I eat a 1,500 calorie cheesesteak and then eat a large fries on top of it, I might consume 2,000 calories. But at 4 o'clock, I'm not going to be hungry for dinner, right? That might be the only thing I eat all day. Whereas if I give myself just ad lib to eat wherever I want, I might eat 2,500 calories in a day instead of 2,000. So yeah, you're going to lose weight because you're eating fewer calories, but there isn't anything about the fast itself that results in weight loss. The fast itself is good for things like insulin sensitivity. You avoid some of those spikes in insulin throughout the day, and that could improve glucose control and things of that nature. It can lead to undereating. You can have nutrient gaps, possible muscle loss from not eating enough protein, energy dips, and things of that nature. So, good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how long does it take for your body to go into
I'm sorry, into what?
autophagy? So how long does it take to
Okay, so
autophagy?
autophagy is when a cell basically eats itself, right? So I think mainly that's going to, and that's a normal, those are normal processes. When cells get damaged, other cells will consume those cells and break them apart and then use them, and they go out into the amino acid pool and things like that. That's more going to happen as a result of decreased protein intake more than just calorie intake. So if you are fasting, and I don't know the exact numbers on this, but I would say I wouldn't go for more than 24 hours without eating any protein, 24 to 36 hours. After that, you're going to start some type of muscle breakdown, be in a negative nitrogen balance. That's not necessarily autophagy from a damaged cell perspective. That's just you're not getting enough protein perspective. So, but you know, that also can be prevented by strength training. So you can delay that. Like if you're doing weight training along with this, you'll you'll prevent that muscle breakdown for a little bit longer. But I would say 24 to 36 hours after that is probably not good. And even if you are eating regularly, if your protein intake is just too low, then you're also going to start losing muscle mass. Okay.
When we do our Neolife detox, that's basically 2 days.
Yeah.
Of no protein at all,
Yeah.
right? So that must be the.
Well, it doesn't really have to be no protein at all. You could eat soy or something, right? Or does it say no protein at all?
It's fruit and vegetables.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like soy, you can eat edamame. That's a vegetable. Yeah. So if you do that, and let's say you start the process of muscle breakdown, you're not going to make, it's not like something you're doing on a regular basis. Like if I'm doing intermittent fasting, that's something I might do for weeks or months at a time. This is a single event thing. And I would say that any negative that might happen as a result of that fast is outweighed by the positives of doing that fast that are going to happen other places in the body, like with the gut and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not going to lose like a ton of muscle because you went 48 hours without eating protein. Yeah.
So in regards to there's intermittent fasting and all of these other 5 diets, whatever it is, but what if you do fasting just with water? What is the difference, like if let's even losing muscle mass? Oh yeah, like if you do fasting for more 24 hours, I mean, I've seen all these videos.
Yeah.
So how does it work in comparison?
Well, the water is not really going to do anything. The water is providing, it's not providing any calories, it's not providing any protein. Muscle loss is a function simply of not getting enough protein because your muscles are constantly being broken down and they're constantly being resynthesized all the time. So what happens when muscle gets broken down is you liberate these amino acids into the blood, and then you basically take amino acids from the food that you're eating to build new muscle. So whether or not you include water in there in the fast doesn't really affect that relationship, right? So if you are not eating enough protein because you're fasting too frequently, or you're not eating enough protein during those eating periods, you're going to lose muscle. That's just the way it's going to go. Now, if you don't have a lot of muscle to begin with, that will eventually get to a point that's so low that it just doesn't change anymore. But that's not a good place to be, right? I mean, the more muscle you have, muscle is basically related to all-cause mortality. The more muscle you have, the less likely you are to die of everything. It's true. It's true. Okay. So anyway, forgot what I was talking about. These things. So intermittent fasting, super B, support energy metabolism, nervous system function. Again, because when you're fasting, your brain tends to not work so well. Omega-3 supports cognitive clarity during those periods, and the same with Elevate, as I said before. Paleo. Has anybody heard? Have anybody ever done like paleo or the carnivore diet, where you just eat meat and stuff? Yeah. Okay. So this is based on what Paleolithic people used to eat, which is, I don't know. First of all, what they ate really depends geographically on where they were, and they lived to like 27 years old. So I don't know that taking nutritional advice from somebody with a lifespan of 27 is really that great of a model. But basically, it's not a bad way to eat in terms of that it avoids basically everything processed. Meat, poultry, fish, eggs, nuts, berries. It's not a whole lot different from the Mediterranean diet, except there's no dairy involved. And it excludes grains and legumes, which I'm not really sure why they found Paleolithic fossils of people with grains in their teeth. So it's not like Paleolithic people weren't eating these things. It just depends on where they were. A modification of this would be a carnivore diet, which is more popular now, I think, than the paleo diet. Carnivore diet is sort of just like it sounds. People are just basically eating meat. And, you know, if you look at, this can work, but carnivore diets aren't like they used to be. If you looked at the only people I can think anymore who are real carnivores would be like Eskimo, Inuit people, and they're eating most of their calories from, a lot of it's eaten raw. If they're killing an animal and eating it, they're eating the organs, they're drinking the blood, they're doing things, they're getting nutrients from that animal that we would never do as an industrialized sort of society. Like, I'm not going to go into the grocery store and buy blood, right? Go to the butcher and say, hey, save me the blood. No, you're not going to do that. But like seal skin, whale blubber, for example. Whale blubber is super high in vitamin C. So, you know, the only place you can get vitamin C, we typically think of is from fruit, right? Oranges, stuff like that. But whale blubber is super high in vitamin C. So they can meet that nutritional need from eating whale skin and whale blubber. We're not going to do that. So when we talk about eating a carnivore diet now, it's not really the same thing. Most people aren't eating organ meat. You said you never have liver in your house, right? I grew up with liver. Yeah. Liver and onions. Yeah. Deer hearts. Yeah. All right. So anyway. So we don't really do that anymore. But, you know, these things are, go ahead.
When you go to the grocery store and you get meat today, what a lot of people don't know is there's a lot of diet in it.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So I've been looking around, and I mostly go to the farmers where they used to hang. And it's very important because a lot of people don't know that, you know, they look great on the shelves, but really when you buy your steak and all that, it should be looking almost like black.
Yeah, that's actually, the point was about dye and meat, and that's definitely true. There are things that are added to meat to make it stay red. Salmon is another good example. Most of the salmon that we eat is farmed, and the salmon would just be gray, but they dye the food so that the salmon looks orange, but it's not really orange. That's an artificial color that's added to the feed. So yeah, there's a lot of that. Okay. Again, paleo, It's socially restrictive. It may increase your grocery store cost if all you're doing is buying meat, especially if you're trying to buy it from a good source, like a farmer's market or something like that. Okay. Solutions for this, again, Trayanen, if you're deciding you're not going to eat grains because that's part of your diet, then Trayanen, which is made from grain, the sterols that are extracted from grains, all the good stuff that's in grains, this would be something that would be an excellent option. Same thing with B12, vitamin B. B12, it comes from the dirt, it comes from soil and gets absorbed into plants. So if you're a paleo and you're not eating those plants, you're probably not getting enough. Calcium, if your diet says I'm not going to eat any dairy, then CalMag would be a great option for those kinds of things. Vegan. Anybody vegan in here?
No,
Yeah,
but I was gonna ask you a question about this, but it's here now.
my daughters are both vegans.
Wow.
It drives me crazy because they always want to come over and cook dinner on Thanksgiving. So come on, we'll have a vegan Thanksgiving. Can't you just come over on a Tuesday? Why do you have to come over on Thanksgiving? Okay, so vegan diets can be very healthy. The problem with vegan diets, I think, primarily is you really need to understand food. You really have to understand how to eat in order to eat without having micronutrient deficiencies and things like that. And the overwhelming majority of people don't. But most vegans learn that they have to be really good at this. Okay, this is something that they need to pay attention to. It's hard to just decide you're going to be vegan one day. Usually it's sort of an evolution where first you become vegetarian, you'll stop eating red meat, then you'll stop eating fish, then you'll stop eating chicken, then you'll stop eating eggs, and then you say, well, I might as well just be vegan. So essentially you're not eating any animal products. It's very high in fiber, antioxidants. And if you look at studies, if you look at the health of vegans versus the standard American diet or the standard Canadian diet, there's going to be a much less of a disease risk factor in a vegan than somebody who's eating a standard diet. They generally will eat lower calories, so they won't have an obesity issue, which is a lot of the reason why they're more healthy. It's great for the cardiovascular system, but again, they're micronutrient deficiencies, and the problem I think is a lot of these micronutrient deficiencies and things associated with micronutrient deficiencies don't show up until years later, right? So, something to consider. It's very hard to follow. Veganism is very difficult to follow, especially in social situations. You show up at somebody's house and they're having a dinner party, and if you don't tell them you're a vegan, odds are you're not eating, right? Because for some reason, people just don't even consider this when they're making food. Common nutrient gaps are B12, iron, calcium, zinc, omega-3s, protein quality can be difficult. Getting enough protein can be difficult. And when I say enough, getting the RDA for protein is not difficult, but I think the RDA for protein is tremendously low, especially if you're somebody who's exercising and you're interested in maximizing muscle mass. It can be rough on the gut, at least until you're used to it. Eating a high amount of fruits of fiber generally can be hard on the gut. But that's something that you can generally accommodate to. As far as vegan products, what we offer at Neolife, we have the Neolife bar, which is 10 grams of plant-based protein and has a bunch of other nutrients in it that are excellent. And then Vegan D, which supports bone, immune health, facilitates calcium absorption, things of that nature. So we don't have a whole lot of vegan products at Neolife, but these are two. So the last thing I want to talk about is the Mediterranean diet. And this is the diet that essentially we recommend. What Neolife recommends is Mediterranean diet. And it's more of sort of an eating style. It's not really designed to be a weight loss method, if you will. Mediterranean diet focuses on whole foods, grains, olive oil, fish, legumes. There's more of an emphasis on plant-based foods than there is on red meat. There's some wine consumption. And this is the diet that has the most evidence to support long-term health. The Mediterranean diet is generally the one from an evidence perspective that shows the greatest promise over the long term for maintaining your health. There's definitely a reduce of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline. It has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. It's very rich in omega-3s. But again, it's not really focused on rapid weight loss, and you can definitely overconsume on a Mediterranean diet. Like I sit in front of a bowl of oil with feta cheese in it, and bread, forget it. Forget it. I mean, I will take that over Oreos any day of the week, right? And you can consume more calories doing that than you can on Oreos. I mean, I certainly can. So, and there's not really structured. So if you're going to go on a diet, most people who go on a diet need some kind of structure. They need some kind of restriction. It has to feel like they're somehow depriving themselves, or it's not really going to work. With the Mediterranean diet, you don't really feel any of it. So it's more just about calorie control. So you might say, why do you even need to supplement on the Mediterranean diet? But I think that with anything, you're always going to have some type of nutrient gap. I don't think that anybody is going to be able to optimize their nutrient intake on a daily basis every day, not in sort of modern society. So I think that taking these products, I think, are great. So again, Pro Vitality, we talked about. Garlic allium complex is another one that is really good for cardiovascular support. And garlic is one of the primary ingredients in the Mediterranean diet. Cardiovascular support, immune support, blood pressure, things of that nature. So those are two excellent products. All right, so again, what drives sustainable weight loss? Consistent calorie deficit. Anything will work if that calorie deficit is maintained. Your metabolism will slow with weight loss, typically due to muscle loss, so you have to prevent the muscle loss that occurs. That requires greater protein intake. Generally, think about doubling the protein intake. So if the protein intake, the RDI for protein is 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight, just double that. And your diet has to be one that you can maintain forever. So really, you shouldn't, if you're thinking about long-term health and from a dietary perspective, don't think about what can I do in the short term to lose a bunch of weight. Think about how can I change my diet so that my intake is going to put me in a slight calorie deficit, and then just be patient and be willing to accept the fact that it's going to take a while for you to lose the fat. It's going to take you a while to get to where your body is supposed to be. Right? And then, because a lot of people put so much effort into thinking about how they're going to lose weight. And if they do all these dietary hoops and they jump through this hoop and that hoop, and then they lose the weight and now they don't know what to do. They usually just go right back to eating the way they were before because they never put any thought into how am I going to keep the weight off. Everybody knows how to lose weight. Nobody knows how to keep it off. And so if you're eating right from the get-go, if you're eating the calories that the body requires from the start, and you're in a slight calorie deficit, and you increase your activity level, you will slowly lose fat over time. You will maintain your muscle mass. You might increase your muscle mass. And as a result of that, you'll basically have permanent physical change. A permanent change in your body requires a permanent change in your behavior. And it's that simple. So if it's not something that you can do forever, if you're on a diet, some type of diet right now, and you're suffering through it, and you say to yourself, there's no way I can maintain this long term. You should quit doing it right now and start doing something that you can maintain long term. And if that means the weight's going to come off slower, then the weight's going to come off slower. You didn't gain it overnight. Don't expect to lose it overnight. In summary, the Mediterranean diet from a health perspective, we think is probably the best thing that you can do. Now, again, I just want to talk very briefly about the difference between Neolife and these other companies. It's only two slides will be good. So 60 years, Neolife's been around, so what, 58? Is that right? 58? That's a long time, right? Most companies are not around for 60 years. We have a scientific advisory board that consists of people from all areas of food science, biochemistry, toxicology, exercise physiology, sports nutrition. And again, we are heavily involved in product development. You know, marketing doesn't come to us and say, we want you to develop a product. We meet on a regular basis and we brainstorm ideas. We read articles about new ingredients, old ingredients. How can we improve a product? We're very busy, very active with respect to other companies, relative to other companies. We have pharmaceutical grade manufacturing standards. Now, what that means is any supplement manufacturer has to meet what's called good manufacturing practices for supplements. Neolife takes it one step further, and we use good manufacturing practices for pharmaceuticals. Okay, so that's voluntary. We don't have to do that. Our manufacturing facility in California has a pharmaceutical manufacturing license by the state of California. By law, we have to have a pharmacist on staff in that facility, right? And we don't have to do that. That's all voluntary, right? So if you think about other supplement companies, if I'm a supplement company and I want to get my product on the shelf in GNC, I have to compete with all those other products who want to get their products on the shelf in GNC. And that requires money. That requires a huge marketing budget. They have to make sexy labeling. They have to have sexy ads and celebrity endorsers and all this other stuff, right? And if I'm spending all my money there, I can't put it into product quality, right? You can't meet both of those demands. We have clinically proven formulas. We run our own studies. Currently, as I said, we have 3 studies that we're currently somewhere in various stages of where they are. I can't tell you what they are, but you know, we're doing that on 3 of our products right now. We have multiple studies on other products, and we only use ingredients that have been clinically studied for decades before we will use them in any of our products. We use whole food-based nutrition whenever possible. There are some bioactive ingredients that we have to use in order to make the whole food products more effective. But whenever possible, we try and use sources that are found in nature in all of our products. And that's expensive. We don't have no compromises on ingredient sourcing. We try and find the most high quality sources for ingredients that are available. We do that again with our pharmaceutical grade manufacturing. We also have a certificate from the Therapeutic Goods Association, which is an Australian-based certification that's even more strict. The standards are even more strict than pharmaceutical grade manufacturing. So all of our products we can trace from the point of source to the point of manufacture till we know it's actually in the bottle. We know, and we do testing on those ingredients as that product moves through the production process. Third-party quality verification. So again, we have FDA inspections and that kind of stuff. And we're a global company. So Neolife is in 50 countries, again, been around for forever, more than 60 years. So we have a very good understanding of product manufacturing and product development all over the world. All right, that's all I have. We're at 11:59.
Any last questions for Todd? Any questions for Todd?
I'll be around.
Yeah, and he'll be around.
Question about cellulite. What causes it? How do you get rid of it?
Cellulite is fat. And your skin, the question was what's cellulite and how do you get rid of it? Your skin has collagen fibers in it, and they sort of lay out like a tennis racket, like a mesh network. And cellulite is just fat pushing through those fibers. So that's why it looks all lumpy like that. That's what gives it that sort of look and texture. But as far as getting rid of it, it's just fat. It's caloric deficit. There's nothing magical that you can do about it. There's no cream you can put on it. There's no like electrical pulse that you can put through it to do something different. That's just the way it is. I wish I had better news for you.
Is it the same as crepe skin?
Crepe skin is actually, that's when your skin itself, that's not from fat. If I'm thinking the same thing. That's when your skin gets like, well, it's crepey,
Right.
right? Yeah. I just thought that happened when you get old. When you don't look old enough for that to happen. So, yeah, I think that's probably a collagen problem also. But it's a different collagen problem. But I don't know what it is.
Gonna say outside of vinegar helps. Oh, okay.
There you go, apple cider vinegar. Well, Nana wants me to talk about the importance of weight training, which I think is critically important. But I'm not sure that weight training is necessarily going to help with cellulite because, again, it's fat that's subcutaneous that's under the skin, and the muscles are under the fat. So in some cases, if you increase the size of the muscle under the fat, you're squeezing the fat further into the skin. That could actually make it worse. But not if you're, the other thing about muscle is though the more you have, the more calories you're going to burn. Your resting metabolism is going to be faster. So over time, that will decrease subcutaneous fat. So initially, if you start weight training, you might build muscle faster than you're losing fat. And that might cause the appearance of that to be worse. But over time, it will get better if you can be patient. Muscle drives fat loss. And you know, what we typically think that if I want to get rid of fat, I should go get on the treadmill and run for as much as I possibly can. Because aerobic exercise burns more calories than weight training, and it does. But aerobic training doesn't increase your resting metabolism. And the resting metabolism is 70% of your caloric burn throughout the day. It's clearly the greatest generator of caloric consumption is you just sitting here being alive, right? I mean, my resting metabolism is 2,400 calories a day, which means if I sit here for an hour and do nothing, I just burned 100 calories. So, and that's 70% of your total caloric burn. So the more muscle you have and the more weight training you do, the more you're going to drive that up. So, and aerobic exercise just doesn't do that.
Give us a quick, what your thoughts are on knowing what your antioxidant level is, and if that's really important.
I don't think knowing what your antioxidant level is. Can you measure your antioxidant level?
Yes, there's a C3 scanner that won the Nobel Health Award.
Well,
and it scans it really quickly and tells you what your level is. And I found my level has gone up really high on the carotenoid complex.
yeah, so my response to that would be if you do something like that, and that scan says, well, you're low in antioxidants, what they're going to tell you to do is eat antioxidant-rich food, right? There's not some medical intervention, right? So I would say just eat those things and take carotenoid complex and make sure you're getting enough antioxidant boosting foods to begin with. And that sort of, I think, would not necessitate the need to get that scan.
Oh, one more, sorry.
Can we just about bone health?
Bone health. Okay, so bone health, what do you want to know about it?
I told my specialist that next time I go see him, if I don't have my bone density better, then he wants me to take a medication.
The single most important way, the best way to stimulate an increase in bone density is heavy weight training. Okay, so if you look from a population-based perspective, the people on this, who do you think the people on this planet with the highest bone density are? What population? Any guesses? What kind of athletes? Powerlifters, right? So when I say weight training, it has to be weight that when you measure osteoporosis, you're looking at what's called the clinically relevant sites, which is the wrist, the low back, the hip, okay? And that's where basically where weight is bearing. So if I'm going to do something like a squat, that means I'm transmitting that load through all of those clinically relevant sites, not the wrist, but it's going through the spine, it's getting transmitted into the hip. Those types of exercises where the bone actually bends under load, because bending of the bone is what stimulates the increase in bone mass. So if you like get in a machine and do a leg extension, you're not transmitting through the long axis of the bone. That's not going to help. You need to do weight-bearing exercises that load those clinically relevant sites. And the more weight bearing exercise that you do, the heavier the load is, the greater the bone is going to adapt. Things like running won't work. I mean, they'll do it a little, but like because of the impact. But think about running versus cycling. If I'm cycling, there's no impact. There's no loading of the bone. If I'm swimming, you're actually unloading the bone, right? So weight training is the thing that's really going to drive it, more than a nutritional intervention.
Todd can stick around, so during lunch and stuff, if you have more questions, just